things?
Indeed, it's using language as a source of evidence about human nature, a source of evidence about the cognitive categories that we use to analyze the world, largely through grammatical categories. For example, what do nouns tell us about our concepts of matter? What do prepositions say about the way that we carve up space? What do tenses say about the human conception of time? What do verbs tell us about the human conception of causality? But I don't only analyze cognitive categories. Language also conveys emotion, most of all when we swear, when we either express our emotions through swearing or elicit emotions in others through the use of emotionally evocative taboo terms. And taboo language tells us something about the inventory of human emotions. Language can also tell us about human social relationships. Language is quintessentially social activity. When we converse with someone, we don't just send packets of information back and forth like two modems, but we're always in some relationship with our conversational partner. And language can tell us something about the kinds of relationships that we're mindful of as we proposition and inform and request and persuade and in other ways try to affect people through our words.
So, strangely enough, for language, then, a lot of these social facets we're trying to convey are actually sort of unspoken, aren't they? They're kind of implicit.
Very much, and people aren't even aware of the kinds of adjustments that they do make in their speech. A simple example is politeness. If I were to say, if you could pass the salt, that would be brilliant, it's a statement that, taken literally, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's a, why are you pondering hypothetical possible worlds there at the dinner table? And it's not as if it would be brilliant if you got the salt. Nonetheless, we instantly recognize this as an imperative, give me the salt, but couched in a way that doesn't make it appear as if you're exerting dominance over the person at the other end of the table, that you're not treating them like some kind of underling or flunky. And in more emotionally fraught situations than that, our words are often even more thickly veiled in innuendo. In threats, we often issue a threat in veiled form, like, nice story you got there, it would be a real shame if something happened to it. In sexual come-ons, famously, we use innuendos like, would you like to come up and see my etchings? These are all cases in which the very act of offering a proposition can change the nature of the relationship in a way that you may not want to happen if the other person turns you down. And so by burying it in innuendo, forcing the listener to do a little bit of mental spade work to get at the meaning, you give yourself some plausible deniability. That is, if the other person doesn't want to go along, if they're not interested in sex, if they don't want to take the bribe, they can choose to ignore it, and the relationship has not been altered as it would if a bald-faced bribe or sexual proposition were uttered in so many words.
Now, it's difficult to pick out from that whether language is shaping the way people are thinking about these things or whether the way they think about them is shaping the language they use. And this is sort of the million-dollar question, I suppose. And there are various takes on that. What's yours?
I argue against strong forms of the linguistic determinism hypothesis, the hypothesis that we cannot think outside of language, the hypothesis that certain languages render their speakers unable to think certain thoughts, the idea that which language you speak has a strong influence on the kinds of reasoning that you can go through. I think there are cases in which language gives us tools that make it easier to think. A simple example is mathematical calculation, mental arithmetic, where we clearly recite snatches of language to ourselves, like 8 times 7 is 56. We hold in working memory bits of speech that record the intermediate products of a computation. So it's not, of course, as if language is independent of thought. Nonetheless, thought has to be prior for a number of reasons. One is that we have to learn a language when we're children, and language learning is not pure cryptography. It's not just calculating the transitional probabilities of one noise after another. We have to learn what sentences mean, and that means that we have to be able to conceptualize what another person is trying to say and match that up with the words coming out of that person's mouth. Also, language is not invented by a committee. It's not like it's handed down to us like a computer programming language, but it's a grassroots phenomenon. It's the ultimate wiki. It's something that anyone can edit. And people clearly have to have had the thoughts that get labeled with words prior to the words coming into existence. It's also why languages are constantly in flux, why the language of today is different from the language of Shakespeare's time. People are always inventing new forms of jargon, new ways of expressing themselves. And finally, language is too vague and unspecified to serve as a medium of thought. It leaves too many details to the imagination. And when we're talking about thought, we're talking about the imagination. Language is ambiguous. Language is vague. It's sketchy. It only works because it's the tip of an iceberg, that we fill in a lot of the missing details effortlessly when we understand or speak, showing that language must sit on top of a much bigger infrastructure of thought and reasoning.
Vague, unspecified, sketchy are all properties, obviously, that we're familiar with in language. But nevertheless, below all of that, there must be a degree of innateness somewhere. We all are equipped with language and we can all do it. We can all learn it as babies. But what exactly is it that's innate if these sort of sketchy words and concepts aren't?
In this book, I don't look so much as what aspects of language are innate, but what aspects of conceptual structure or thought might be innate. We don't know. But it can't be particular concepts like a giraffe or a carburetor or a trombone or a doorknob. Those you clearly have to learn from your culture. On the other hand, word learning would be impossible if we didn't have some kinds of conceptual material out of which to form concepts. And if you look at the kinds of concepts that seem to keep reappearing in language after language and in construction after construction, you find that pretty soon you start to turn back on yourself and the same ones keep popping up and leading to important grammatical distinctions. The concept of causation, the concept of intention, the difference between a means and an end, the concept of an object, the distinction between something that has boundaries and the stuff of which it's made, a conception of time as dichotomized or trichotomized between the present, the moment of consciousness, and an interval before it and an interval after it. Concepts at that level of abstraction, the kind of abstraction that Immanuel Kant wrote about several hundred years ago, which don't correspond to any of our actual thoughts, but are the scaffolding or skeletons around which we build concrete thoughts. Those not only seem necessary to give us coherent intelligence, but my interest in them came from the fact they keep popping up over and over again in language.